I don't know if people online can hear. Could you put a chat in them to say that the microphones aren't working in the room?
I can. I can. Yes.
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Right. Apologies for having a slight issue with the screens, but anyway, thank you those who have joined online as well as obviously those who are in the room this morning. We're obviously starting a few minutes late, but I say I will do everything I can to try and ensure that we finish on time today. A reasonable number of topics to cover today, and we're joined by Grant from Grant Thornton, who specifically give us an update on the external audit process under item 6. But should we just start with apologies?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Ashley and from Councillor Priest. Thank you.
Okay, but I think that means that we are still quorum, which is great. And again, thank you again to everybody who's made the effort to join us today. Declaration of interest. Just to read out again, members are reminded of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest they have in an item being discussed during the course of the meeting. In addition, the receipt of any gift or hospitality should be declared where the value of it was thought to have exceeded £25 for gifts or £40 for hospitality. We're actually talking about this policy later on in the agenda, but anything anybody needs to declare? Not? No, thank you. Chair's remarks. The only thing I just wanted to flag is that I continue to liaise with the chair, Councillor Baton, who's the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. There was a specific issue on which I discussed with her a few weeks ago, which is actually relating to item 7 on the agenda today, the loan to Woking Borough Council, because, as you're aware, ARAC itself has delegated responsibility for review and recommendation of the Treasury Management Policy, and that was an issue that was being discussed at ONS. So I discussed that with Councillor Baton. I can pick up on that under item 7. Secondly, at Councillor Baton's recommendation, actually, we are going to have meetings every couple of months involving her as chair of ONS, myself as chair of ARAC, and also the newly appointed chair of the Transport Delivery Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Councillor McNicholas from Coventry. So just to let members of this committee know that that process has been put in place for the first time this year. That was all I wanted to say. Chair's box. Okay. Minutes of the last meeting, which is our meeting of the 19th of July. Anybody got any comments from the perspective of factual accuracy on these minutes? See that they're a fair record, okay, and therefore they will go to the board next Friday, the Command Authority board, but because we record, they will go for noting rather than requiring approval. Again, a welcome new development. In terms of matters arising, thank you, Wendy, for the action tracker, which I found very helpful in terms of the action list coming out of the meeting, which we'll just come back to in a short while. But in terms of this set of minutes, have we actually addressed this point about the 8.8 million of debit balances on the purchase ledger? I didn't actually see it in the report.
I didn't write it up in the report because it was part of the general ledger.
Right. So it was part of the
audit.
accounts payable.
It wasn't part of accounts payable, but we did get to the bottom of it, and it was a transaction that happened on the last day of the month.
Right.
And was posted onto the ledger on Thursday, the following month. So it's just one big transaction.
Okay.
That is a control risk that we've now addressed.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you very much. Personal hobby horse line about debit balances on in the wrong part of the accounts. So thank you very much. There was also a point around, Grant, you facilitating an introduction to your successor for.
We've got a meeting this afternoon, Chair, where we're looking to finalise portfolios for our 23-24 audit client base. So after that meeting, I'll be able to contact you and Louise and let you know that person is likely to be and get the meetings arranged.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay. Didn't have anything else on the internal audit. We're picking up on the two reports in this meeting that we referenced last time. We'll also pick up on, Councillor Kay's, your observations around internal audit when we get to item 9 on the agenda, if that's okay. I didn't have anything else. Anybody else got any other matters arising on the minutes of last time's meeting? If not, no. And in terms of the action list, I say we're picking up the 4 of the items that are on the list in today's meeting, and the one around the external audit plan is the one we've just discussed as hopefully being addressed before our next meeting in December. And strategic risk register, thank you to Peter for, in his report, giving us a readable extract of the risk register, which obviously facilitates our discussion under item 8 today. Very good. Look forward to a bit of time.
Have you officially approved the minutes?
Yes.
All right.
I think we did.
Okay, yes.
I think we did.
Technically, should we?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I think people nodded when I raised the minutes.
yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Very good. Right, which brings us on to, I think, item 6 on the agenda, which is an update on the annual accounts process. Who's leading on that?
Yeah, I'll
Linda
take it.
or
I'll take it. Yeah.
Louise? Okay, thank you.
So the audit process for the 22-23 accounts started on the 3rd of July, slightly later than we would normally start, but we were originally planning to bring the accounts and the audit findings to this meeting today, but for a variety of reasons we've not been able to do that, including the complexity of the combined authorities accounts and also additional obligations on the auditors. So I won't say much more than that before I hand over to Grant, who's got a progress update for us.
And can we also pick up on 21-22 as well as 22-23?
Yeah, I was going to start with that, Chair. You've got the progress report in front of you. I'll assume that most people have had the opportunity to read it, but I'll try and just pick out some of the highlights from that. In terms of 21-22, as we say in the report, we have received the final piece of information required from the pension fund auditor, i.e. myself, in terms of membership data, and we're satisfied, that the information that provided to the actuary that then supports the updated 22-23 pension or 21-22 pension disclosures is accurate. Therefore, we are in a position to look to include the audit. Since that point, there was some national, I'm sure members are aware of that, in the local context around the reinforced aerated autoclave concrete matter, in terms of does that impact upon the authority, and we've had a response from yourselves in terms of that. We don't think it's going to be a material issue, if at all, for yourselves. So we're now in a position that we can look to conclude the audit for 21-22, and we'll be doing that over the next sort of week or so. So we will look to finalise the 21-22 audit in the next sort of week to try and issue the opinion. So that is, and that will be an unqualified opinion in respect of that. And we've already brought the VFM conclusions to yourself. I will need to probably just reissue that report just to update the 1 page on financial opinion work, but then that should also enable us to certify the audit closed.
Okay. After this, Helen or Louise, is there anything further that ARAC needs to do in respect to those accounts?
No, Chair, there's nothing further to do.
Okay. They just need
We'll
to
also
sign.
AFR. I mean, I think that the one thing that's changed significantly probably is just the pensions figure, really.
Yeah.
So, or what we've looked at is pensions figure. So but I think the accounts came to the last meeting, didn't they? The updated accounts.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there's no.
So there's probably just a formal confirmation that.
Yeah, we need to go through, I suppose, Chair, from your as a subsequent events review, has anything changed since we sort of finalised our work? But we'll do that with Linda as finance director, and I'll take that from. We may.
And a letter of representation will have to be signed. Yeah. Okay. But nothing more for this committee. Okay.
So moving on to 22-23, as Louise has indicated, we did start the audit back in July, and that was in as we did, as I said, we had a sort of realigned timetable agreed with officers. We have made progress, but as we say here, we're not in a position to issue a draft audit findings report at this time. And much of that does allude to, and we said this before, the increasing complexity that the authority is witnessing as it's taken on more services. And in terms of that, it's, from our perspective, it's getting the audit trails and the supporting evidence behind that is taking longer to resolve than both sides would have hoped, and also developing audit strategies and obtaining, I suppose, appropriate audit evidence. And as members are aware, I'm sure that the bar somewhat in terms of quality and audit evidence has been raised incrementally over a number of years. So we're looking to get back to, I suppose, the substantive documents in relation to that. But so it's taking longer to get the appropriate assurance. We have a meeting arranged with Linda and the team for next week, when we're going to look to get a clearer timeline on what needs to be done and completed, so that we can complete our work by the end of November. That's our plan at the moment. I think in terms of the probably biggest area that we're still looking to finalise is capital grants, and can we get the evidence around that? So we're going to have that meeting next week. We'll then come, if there's any issues coming out of that meeting, and I don't know there will or not be around that, we're aiming to substantially, hopefully, complete our work by the end of November. That will then enable us to finalise the audit for the next audit committee in December. That's the overall plan for the audit in respect of 22-23. We are also, actually, in terms of that, we've just been kicking off our value for money work. Probably this week we had a meeting, so that will run parallel to that. So hopefully that will also come through in a similar timeline for that audit committee. Next page is just
sorry. There's this outstanding issue which seems to be sector wide around the pension position.
We are looking at
IFRIC 14, and
yeah, we are there are ongoing meetings around, and we are expecting an update to sit for bulletin on around IFRIC 14, around what you recognise in your financial statements. I think, well, I know there are meetings happening in the next couple of days with actuaries and between the firms to try and get a, if as possible, consistent line. But as it's one of those difficult areas, because as I'm sure you're aware, Chair, in terms of, and we can't tell you how to account for things in your accounts. But then there's that sort of reciprocal back about, well, if we do it this way, are you comfortable? So there's that little conversation going on at the moment between both parties, because we need to remain independent, but there are various approaches that can be done by actuaries. I think we're looking for a bit more consensus between the firms on the number of approaches that are acceptable. Now, hopefully, as I say, sit for bulletin, there was a draft out that I've seen, comments are due back at the end of this week, that may well help move it forward a little bit. I mean, I think the bigger thing from your perspective is what asset you recognise on the balance sheet and how you value that asset, in terms of, you have a pension asset. I think we all agreed that that asset can be recognised under the code. It's the value of that asset, and there's, whether it is the IS 19 figure, which is the figure you've got from the actuary in terms of the actual roll forward, or whether there's something called an asset ceiling kicks in, and that might in some way restrict the value of asset you recognise. And I think how you calculate those various numbers relies on a various set of assumptions you can make, and I think that's the sort of debate that's going on in the sector at the moment around that. So we are an ongoing discussion with that. I mean, ultimately, even if it's recognised, it won't impact directly upon available. It's a classic one. I know that some members won't. In fact, the available resources, the combined authority, it's what accounting standards will say you need to recognise on the balance sheet, but it wouldn't necessarily be an asset that you would be able to draw down and spend in a cash ways. It would be sort of reflected ultimately in reduced contributions going forward, etc. So it's not something that you can immediately go, oh, actually, we can utilise that to support spending. It won't be in that. It's not like of that nature.
This is an issue that the private sector had to deal with a few years ago, and there was a lot of discussions at the time. It is a bit of technical accounting, but it's something that has got to be in the accounts, and if it's not resolved, it will be a reason why we aren't able to sign the accounts. So, that's why I'm sort of just flagging it as something where it would be good to get it resolved sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, progress has been made. I mean, it's just I mean, I think we have a view as a firm, but I think it's trying to make sure that we're consistent across the public sector as a whole, in terms of that as well. So there are conversations going on
Okay.
around that. So
So the next meeting is the 4th of December, which does mean obviously papers going out the week before that. So, you know, we would be clearly extremely keen to be in a position to receive your report at that point in time. And, you know, if that also enabled us to approve the accounts, then that would be even better. So,
yeah, I mean, I think, Chair, in terms of that, they've got a meeting next week with the finance team. I think following that meeting, I mean, we can always draft a report. I mean, that's not, I mean, we can always draft an audit findings report. I think what we want to do, though, is have that ideally fully completed. Or if the, you know, at a worst case scenario, only 1 or 2 items. I don't want to come to you with saying we've got about 8 items to go, because that wouldn't give you any assurance. I think if we can get to a point where if there is just one matter, let's just say it is a 14 to resolve, at least then we know that that's the one point, and then we will sign off as soon as possible. But I think we have the meeting next week, and then we'll come back to you with, we'll put direct to your chair and say this is what the plan is overall around that, and says complete by the end of substantially by the end of November, and report to you.
okay, on that meeting. Okay, thank you.
I mean, just in terms of where we are on the audit to date, we haven't identified any issues around fraud and revenue expenditure recognition to date. We haven't identified any issues around journals at this point in time. There might be some areas for improvement around the control environment, but nothing that's going to sort of drive our audit. As I say, we've talked about the pension liability, and then we've given some progress on various recommendations. I mean, the main one is, as I was saying, around the complexity of the WIT trail. We're still working that through with officers. And I think, as I say, from the journal, we identified one anomaly on journals last year around senior officer, but we haven't identified the same thing this year.
And I will receive the ARAC as well. Exactly. And the Quoracy of ARAC will not feature anywhere.
I mean, I mean, today's probably a bit of a unique event in terms of a strike and things like that as well, isn't it? So, but yes, we are seeing the greater Quoracy, which is good. So that's and you know, and that's down to loads of members and yourself to make sure that that can happen. And you have to be in person to make a decision until that changes. But other than that, and so I suppose an overall on page 18 where we've gone through audit deliverables, we just see the revised plan is to sort of hopefully complete by December.
Questions from other members of the committee? Linda, is there anything you wanted to say at this point?
No, it's fine.
All right, well, we look forward to receiving. Oh,
I was just wondering, on page 15, you say you select a sample of journals, and you talk about the criteria for selecting them. Can you just tell me how you select them based on the criteria? What is it you're looking for?
Yeah, we sort of have a two-stage approach really to journals in terms of what we call sort of picking a primary set of journals, and that's when we sort of apply. We look at that and go, for journals to a sense that we're looking to say are the journals looking unusual in terms of we wouldn't expect them to be made? Are they of high value? Will they materially affect the account? So I suppose, you know, could there be evidence that someone has looked to deliberately override the processes to reflect the change in the financial position of the authority? So we normally go down and consider sort of the control environment. So we look at the overall control environment. How do journals get processed? How do they get posted? How do they get authorised? So we do an assessment along those lines, and we, being auditors, we either go your low risk, medium risk, or high risk, and that goes into a sort of into workbook. And then what we do is then go through and consider, are there any particular areas where we feel that we might need to maybe pick out particular journals, i.e. have we found any that might have been authorised by, let's say, or by someone like Louise, we wouldn't expect to authorise journal, things like that, or posted by them. So we go through a sample, we pick out whether any, I suppose, specific journals around that. We look for, I don't know, simple ones like starters and leavers. If someone's left, have they posted a journal after they've left? We need to look at that. And then we go for sort of, or do the journals look outside of what the normal transaction? So we go through that sort of stage one process and pick out specific journals. We then have what we call a sort of secondary process, where we have, as part of our IT technology, there's a number of questions we ask that we risk rate. So it's sort of, could it affect the bottom line of the balance sheet? Is it of high value compared to the average? And we rate those. And then there's some, I suppose, for example, we see black box in the background, then goes through and says, well, which of these journals have these characteristics? It scores them, and then it will pick out a sample. So it's a combination of, I suppose, in a way, us applying knowledge specifically of the authority and saying those journals, we don't understand them. Not saying they're wrong, but we just don't understand them. We need to get a better understanding. And then there's more of a, I suppose, an IT driven one where it looks at it and goes, actually, these characteristics you've said are higher risk. Those journals seem to have these characteristics. We think you should look at those. I mean, in terms of, minimum sample sizes, we either look at like 25, 50 or 75 generally, depending on where, and you could be anywhere on that spectrum in terms of that, in terms of where we are. So that's our overall approach to journals. So that's how we pick them out.
And normally, actually, sorry, in the report that comes back to us, you set out the criteria that you apply. So
yeah, we don't get to give in that detail because I suppose the way we have to keep it independent, because if we tell what people we're looking at, then there's a chance.
No.
So I think in terms of that, but yeah, we do share what we found and why we found it in that sense, if you know what I mean. I mean, some of it's really sort of common sense. There's some really big journals. Generally, most journals should go through at the year end. I mean, local government generally seems to post a lot more journals than you probably would see in a commercial world. It's just the way things operate generally, because a lot of that's around complexity of classifications within the account, and you need to move stuff around a lot. So we do see that quite a lot, but we don't try and look at maybe a treasury management journal because we know it wouldn't be unusual. It'd be big, but it's not unusual.
Thank you, Chair. So if, say, for instance, the budget doubled, then that would be a criteria to look at it.
We would probably pick that up somewhere differently because we look at expenditure. Yes. So yes, that will, we would look at if your expenditure on an area doubled overnight, that would be an area of audit focus, and we would need to understand. It could just be that you picked up a new service and therefore we expect it to double. But that will get picked up probably as our testing of expenditure. We do specific other testing on OPEX or expenditure and looking at those debits and credits as the chair has alluded to. So that might get picked up somewhere separately. But if something in those journals moves that number that says, oh, actually we made a deficit and suddenly you turned it into a surplus, we might go, well, that looks a bit weird. Or we look for big journals that maybe move stuff from revenue into capital. That way we might look at something that then affects your actual bottom line. I'm not saying you're doing that, but those are sort of risks that we consider.
Very good. Thank you. Is that okay? Thank you. Okay, no other questions for Rod. Very much, and we look forward to seeing you in December. This brings us on to item 7. Linda, are you going to lead on this one? Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. So I'll take the briefing note as read. Obviously, the briefing note was I was asked to produce and attend overview and scrutiny committee regarding interlocal authority treasury transactions. I attended overview and scrutiny last month, and they were satisfied that actually I reported to them that all of our transactions, including those to Woking, are within our approved treasury management strategy. We don't consider we are at any risk in terms of those transactions. We have had no, even when the local authority issues a 114, they continue to trade, and I have had written assurance from their finance director that those loans are at no risk. But however, given the interest in the transactions that the media and the press generated, we have actually, I took the decision to tighten our operational processes to ensure that my treasury team does not forward deal any more forward than 1 month with any local authorities. So we would normally forward deal on cash between 6 to 8 months, but actually I've restricted that down to 1 month now to ensure that in the interim period, if there is any periods of risk, even though there of an authority going into a 114, not that there is any risk of that, but it's just about tightening those operational practices. We do have, as reported to overview and scrutiny, we do have 2 forward deals with Birmingham City Council again approved with Birmingham prior to them issuing a 114. And obviously those forward deals will continue to progress. As I've said, there is no financial risk to that. A local authority continues to operate even while it's in a 114 notice period. So that's all I was going to say on that. Just happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you. Excuse me, you said a bit about what you meant by limiting exposure. Could you just give us a flavour of the sort of enquiries that your team make in the current situation? Because I guess there are many local authorities on a sort of wide spectrum from, you know, slightly worried to extremely worried about their financial position. You know, in the private sector, we talk about due diligence. I mean, is there a similar process that your team undertake?
Yeah, so essentially we use due diligence. The Treasury Management Strategy sets out the required due diligence. It also ensures that we only ever put our cash with BBB plus organisations. The issue with local authorities is whether they are in a 114 territory or not. Their covenant is so strong that they are not considered to be a risky investment opportunity, even if they are in 114 territory. So in terms of financial due diligence, local authorities, including central government, are always classed as a AA minus investment, which is a very highly secure investment, even if they're in 114 territory. But what we will do, and what I have asked, so there is various things that we look at. So we will look at where the local authority is in terms of its SITFA resilience indicators, and whilst any of them are not, even if they're on an outlier on the SITFA resilience index in terms of their financial position, they are still considered a very highly secure investment, and therefore not necessarily a risk to still invest with those. What I have said to the team, however, is because of the negative press that was surrounded this issue, we will now only forward deal for 1 month, and we will only forward deal with local authorities that are sitting in that middle ground of the SITFA resilience indicators. So I'm not investing with any outliers at this point.
Okay, it's helpful. Other questions?
It may be maybe a ridiculous question, I don't know, but loans given out, is there a priority given to our own local authorities and surrounding local authorities? Is there a need that we cater for them before other areas of the UK or in England? Is
So
that a fair question?
Yeah, I mean, we do tend to because all local authorities use a national broker to do interlocal authority treasury transactions. However, what we do is we quite often will deal within the region outside of that broker. So inter West Midlands authorities may contact each other to actually say, look, we need to be borrowing short term, or we've got some money to lend short term. Is there an opportunity between us to do this before we go to the national broker? So it is something that we look at. Not all local authorities are in a borrowing position. You know, a lot of local authorities at this point are in a position where they have surplus cash, so they don't need. So there isn't a lot of local authorities out there at the minute. They're actually borrowing anyway. So it tends to be that, I mean, while we've got that Birmingham, we've got some treasury deals with Birmingham. Actually, not all of our other West Midlands authorities are in a position where they're needing to borrow at the minute, which is why we use the national framework.
Okay.
Sorry, I keep coughing. I have to keep putting my mic on. Does that answer the question or not?
Yeah, thank you. Lisa, we'll come to you in a moment. Councillor. Yeah.
Good morning, Chair. Can you hear me? I don't have the microphone in.
The microphones aren't working, so sorry.
But in the briefing note, it states that the loan was agreed before the section 114 was actually announced and was legally binding, but then the transactions occurred following the 114 notice. Just thinking again, maybe it's a new question, but in the future, are you looking at maybe changing the agreement, or is it even possible so that in that time period between when it's agreed and the transactions actually carried out, could there be a clause where it could be reconsidered or changed in that time gap?
So instead of so the legal advice, once you've got that legal agreement in place, it's a standard legal agreement, and once that legal agreement's in place, then absolutely there is currently no clause in there to say if a council subsequently issues a 114, so the immediate action I've taken is to say I won't forward deal anymore, you know, because these deals were done 6 months ahead of when the money was due to be drawn. Actually, we're only dealing now forward dealing 1 month in advance, so there's very little time opportunity. If a council is going to wobble, it is going to wobble. We will know within a month if it's wobbling. So actually, whilst we could look at actually the contractual arrangements around the actual specific legal agreement, the best course, the immediate course of action that didn't require any sort of legal advice was I'll just not forward deal in so far into the future.
So okay, so that's the main.
Yes.
You know, we could, I suppose, look at amending the agreements. I'm not sure whether that would be possible, but at the moment the agreements don't allow for a position whereby if once we've committed to making the loan, that we could not proceed with that loan, even if the 114 notice was issued in the intervening period. But I'll come back to that in a minute.
No, just come in just to say, we're having that conversation around that actually even when in 114 territory, or even when a council has issued a 114, their covenant is still extremely secure and strong because they will continue to operate, and in whatever form or whatever happens to them, they continue to operate because they operate statutory services and they have statutory income coming in. So their covenant is still really, really high, and actually a lot higher than a lot of other institutions that you may choose to use. So whilst we're talking about restricting things and saying, oh, don't issue it to a council in a 114, and which I given the press interest I won't do now, actually the covenant is still very strong, and there isn't any examples in history where an authority, even in a 114 situation, has failed to pay and continue to operate.
Yeah, but I just think we need to be quite careful that we don't confuse the issue. Yeah, I absolutely understand the quality of the covenant and therefore the security behind the loan, but you have chosen to manage the risk, and you could argue whether it's financial risk or reputational risk, but you've choose to manage the risk by limiting the period over which you would cover a forward deal. Basically, that has been one of the responses. Back to Councillor Barsley's point, one of the responses to the issue has been the Treasury team under your leadership to limit forward dealing to 1 month.
I have done that, yes, on the basis of reputational risk, given that the authority was quoted as being reckless in the press, and actually that wasn't true, because the financial covenant strength of the loan that we'd made was not reckless. But to avoid such potential reputational damage in future, I've taken the decision to tighten the operational practice.
And I think we note that, acknowledge it. Personally, I'm not uncomfortable with that as a position, and I understand why it's been taken. But I do think it's important people understand that is the basis on which you've taken that decision. I say I had the opportunity to go through a lot of this detail with Linda leading up to the overview and scrutiny meeting. Obviously, we all approve the policy that applies. You know, there is, just to give you that bit of context, at the end of March, you know, there were £718 million worth of investments in terms of cash that had been loaned out to other organisations, 80 different organisations. They included Birmingham, Coventry and Samwell at that time as organisations that had requested funds. Those are all funds that are out on typically 5 or 10 million tranches up to a maximum of 20, which is again what's set out in the policy, and they are almost all for less than 12 months in terms of a loan period. Okay, so those are a number of the factors that are in play to manage the risk associated with these investments. But probably the most important one of all is, as I say, the security that is provided by those counterparties. So that's where we are. I personally, what I've just requested is that when we get our next report, half-year report, the December meeting, we also, Linda, I think it'd be just helpful just to make sure that Mark does flag the amendments that you've made to the operating practice, just so that's set out in writing and you've described those in this meeting. And I also think, as I said to you previously, I think in terms of the appendix has historically simply reported all the investments that are currently have been made. I think it will be useful to have a second appendix which shows the forward commitments that have also been made at a particular point in time, just for the sake of completeness.
Yes, yeah, agree.
Obviously, confirmation that you have continued to operate within the framework that we've approved. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much. With regard to treasury management, you mentioned surplus money in accounts, and as we all know, low interest rates. Do we operate an overnight banking? It's a facility the banks give. You transfer the money from the account, get a larger interest, and then it's returned in the morning back into your account. I know our treasury management in Warsaw operates, but
We do.
And if you do,
We do, yes. So again, this is something I've slightly tweaked. So we do obviously, because we have to hold we have to hold a certain amount in our overnight current account just in case there is any movement that we didn't expect overnight. That normally I hold that normally over a overnight at around 20 million pounds. All of the cash goes out on higher return investments. That overnight, as you said, as all local authorities do, that overnight deposit goes out internally within our banking to get an overnight rate that is more favourable than it just sitting in the current account, and it comes back in the next morning. One of the things I've done to give our treasury team a little bit more headroom is, because of limiting our counterparties now, limiting the counterparties down, what we've now done is said, well, actually, we can carry up to 50 million in our overnight. But again, it does go out overnight to a higher interest rate and come back in the next morning. Yes, the same as all local authorities would practices that other local authorities undertake.
Okay.
that's good assurance. Thank you very much.
Lisa, did you still have a question? You had your hand up and now you've taken it down. So.
I think you've answered it. It was more just the value of the exposure with BCC, and have you sought any assurances that they will honour the investment / loan, whichever it is? But I think you've pretty much answered it. Thank
you very much. Could I just, for the record, by the way, I think I said 718 million. That should have been 712 million earlier, just to make sure. I don't want to give the wrong number out. 712 million as at the end of March in terms of portfolio of investments. Okay, right. Unless there are any further questions on that, it's obviously a matter which we will discuss again at the December meeting. As I say, we'll have our usual half-year report, and it will be amended to address those couple of points that we've discussed as part of this discussion. But I think that probably leads us in quite nicely to the issue of risk and the update on the strategic risk, which I think, Linda, are you going to lead on again, or is
Actually, because I'm not feeling about Peter, I've asked Peter if you could just do it this time, please. Thank you.
Okay, Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, not a problem. I'll assume as always that you've read the papers, and thanks for the comments earlier, Mark. Yes, I've tried to reflect some of those comments about the difficulty of navigating the risk register. So hopefully this pack is easier to read and easier to get round. But as always, the key messages from the executive board are captured in the risk update slides. And just to pick out a couple of really key points, I suppose main takeaways would be that there is one new issue that's been highlighted, and that's around the Buckingham Group going into administration. So we've captured that on our issues log. There are 3 new risks. One which links back to the points that Linda was just discussing, which is the the financial situation of other local authority partners, and then there are 2 other new risks, one around the devolution deal and one around the single settlement. So they're the 3 new risks, but there has been one risk that has been closed, and we've taken off of the risk register, which was around external factors. And hopefully there's a good explanation of why we've chosen to remove that risk. So that's just a quick whiz through those key messages. Like I say, hopefully it's a lot easier to navigate, and if you've got any questions, then happy to discuss them.
Great, thank you very much. Opening it up for questions from members of the committee. A couple of things I wouldn't mind raising, but Councillor Jones.
Thank you. It's questions around, first of all, single settlement negotiations and then the TDD ratification as well. So both of these depend, as I understand it, on partner councils to ratify things or agree approaches to things. I was wondering, where are we at in the TDD ratification process with the constituent authorities? And on the single settlement, what's the process for that? And where are the risks specifically within that?
So do you want me to just Helen, I don't know whether you know where we are with the individual authorities ratifying them. The last check-in that we had was on Friday, where I think 5 out of the 7 had ratified. We were still waiting for 2. And we are expecting that 6 out of the 7 will have ratified before the Devo deal report goes to the CA board in October. Helen, I don't know whether you've got any, is that correct? I think.
Just looking at the list, Chair, I think Birmingham, Wolverhampton, Sandwell, Walsall have endorsed. Board is on the 13th. Dudley, Solihull and Coventry are after the 13th, I believe. I don't know whether there's been any changes to that.
So I think actually the 2, I think it's just Coventry actually that's going to have ratify after the 13th. I think the other 2 will ratify before is the latest schedule. And it is as we discussed last week with leaders, it is actually a 2/3 decision at board as well. Not least because it is essentially, other than the bus service operator grant devolution, which is the only thing in the deal that gives the authority new powers, the rest of it is simply new money or money. So actually the only thing that needs 100% ratification is the taking on of the powers to administer the bus services operator grant powers. So that's how the board will be approached on the 13th of October. In terms of the Devo deal itself, it is we are in dialogue with various parts of DLUC and Treasury to set out the high level principles of the various elements of the deal. I think the last I spoke to the team, I think there was certainly over 100 elements of the Devo deal. Not all of them have financial consequences, obviously, but the two, or should I say, the three key financial ones are around the investment zones and levelling up zones, and the dialogue is continuing with DLUC, Treasury, and our local authority partners as to how that will work. There is the issue about us as a region retaining 10 years, the next 10 years worth of business rates locally within the region and business rates growth. So again, we are working that through with DLUC, Treasury, and our local authority partners, so the finance reps from your individual local authorities. And then the single settlement, again, we're working on that in conjunction with your regen directors, your monitoring officers, and your finance directors in terms of the deal. None of that, all of that detail on all of those three aspects will continue to be worked up over the next 18 months. So the ratification on the 13th is essentially in principle, but the detail, it continues to be worked up. And obviously from our perspective and from a combined authority perspective, ultimately if it doesn't work for us, we don't have to ultimately sign up to it. There are clauses in all of the MOUs that mean actually if it doesn't work for us, then we can walk away. The key part of that is to ensure that we as a region are better off as a result of the deal. And we are working very closely with your finance directors to make sure that we can continually assess and assure ourselves as a region that actually what we do get from that deal means that nobody is any worse off as a result of signing up to it. So that's the key element that we're dealing with in terms of, if you like, risk at the minute.
Okay. Other questions? I say I've got three that I wouldn't mind throwing in. Nobody else has. Well, three quick observations. First of all, just to welcome, obviously, the confirmation of the BSOG Plus funding in respect of the bus network. I imagine that's obviously very welcome. Secondly, just on the Buckingham Group contracting, I'm always very mindful of the benefit of hindsight when it comes to these things. But have we reviewed the due diligence, to use a phrase we've asked previously? Have we reviewed the due diligence we did around the awarding of that contract to that organisation, given that it's gone into administration within 14 months of the award?
I certainly don't know what has happened there. I can certainly sort of talk to colleagues within TFWM and find out what they may or may have done in terms of sort of lessons learned around this. I know that they're looking at sort of exploring what their options are going forward, but I can certainly ask them whether there's been any sort of reflection on lessons learned around what's gone on.
And I completely get that the risk is how do we manage this going forward, and which is the risk you have quite rightly flagged. I think Kier Group took over the rail business as part of the administrations, and Kier Group are obviously an enormous organisation, but I don't know whether that includes this contract, but obviously you're focused on that. But yeah, from just a risk perspective, I'm just interested as to, have we gone back and looked at, are we comfortable we did the appropriate due diligence around that organisation when awarding them the contract?
We'll certainly pick that up and bring that assurance back. I I don't know enough about the detail yet, but there has certainly been internally lessons learned in that. So I just need to just revisit that and make sure I can give you that reassurance. And yes, there is a report going to the Combined Authority Board on the 13th of October in regard to the future of this contract and how this scheme will continue to be delivered.
Okay, and my last question was just, I appreciate this is probably early days, but in respect of the new risk around local authority partners in financial difficulties, do you want to just give us a minute of just the flavour of the type of risks that you are envisaging or contemplating in respect of that item?
So yeah, so I suppose it's difficult because we are the first mayoral combined authority to have a constituent partner issue a 114 notice. So we're in uncharted territory here. That said, you know, clearly the issue of Birmingham's finances is for Birmingham, absolutely. But what we have done from a CA perspective is I have sought assurance from the authorities, Birmingham's Section 151 officer, that none of the funding that Birmingham are giving to the combined authority is at risk. So I've had that assurance, and that I've also sought assurance that none of the programmes that the combined authority are funding Birmingham to deliver are at risk. So those are the two immediate reassurances I obtained from their Section 151 officer. Treasury, obviously, we've just talked about that, so we've got a couple of forward Treasury deals. The other piece, I suppose, is just around forward financial planning. Now, if we obviously, from a combined authority perspective, we have a legal, we are the legal transport authority for the region and have to set an annual levy. The combined authority sets its levy and the metropolitan authorities legally have to pay that. But obviously we do that. We are minded as to whether or not, when we do set that, whether or not this is actually affordable for our constituent partners. So there is still a forward risk as to, depending on the financial recovery plan that Birmingham put in place, in terms of the forward funding and the forward capacity of Birmingham to deliver what we need Birmingham to deliver as part of the MCA. But that's an ongoing, that is an ongoing conversation that I'm having. Certainly I need to wait to see the details of Birmingham's financial recovery plan, of which we will ensure that actually we will go through that and make sure there are no risks to the combined authority in what that delivers. I'm not expecting any, by the way, because I have had assurance, as I said, in terms of forward programmes. And then I'm also as part of being the finance director of an MCA, the mayoral combined authorities nationally are in conversation with both CIPFA, which is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance, and with DLUC around potential implications. I don't think at the minute we're in new territory here, and organisations such as CIPFA and DLUC need to start thinking about what guidance they need to be issuing in this space, because this is the first instance where an authority, a constituent authority of an MCA, has issued a 114.
Okay. Apologies, Linda, as you probably gather, it's 11 o'clock, and so we're having the usual announcements.
Don't they test her along the night?
Is that it?
Might not be.
Okay, right. Councillor.
Yeah, just to understand that, Linda, you mentioned about SIPFA. I'm not aware of any new guidance from SIPFA on this particular issue. Is there any?
So SIPFA, I spoke to the chief executive of SIPFA last week. they have issued, or they are about to issue, tightened guidance to all local authorities with regard to actions to be taken under a Section 114 notice. So that there is it's either out there or it's coming, one or the other. But the other piece for me then that I have flagged with SIPFA is actually for their wider consideration in conjunction with a conversation with DLUC about what does that practically mean for mayoral combined authorities if a constituent issues a 114. I actually don't think there is a specific issue, but I think that those two, both the government department and SIPFA as the sort of advisory body, need to at least consider that and at least give some guidance out on that. So they've issued specific tightened guidance for local authorities, or they're about to, one or the other. And then I've asked them to specifically pick up mayoral combined authority thoughts in that at a later date.
And I welcome the fact this risk is described not just in the context of 114, because I think it is important to acknowledge some of the strain that many organisations are under, and therefore whether or not that has broader implications, because it's not just about 114, is it? You know, you describe it as local authority partners in financial difficulties, and we shouldn't just restrict our thinking to a scenario of a specific 114, because the sort of issues you were talking about earlier aren't necessarily just dependent on a 114 situation. Councillor Jones, did you want to say anything? Did you about to say something, or have we answered it?
No, obviously I am from Birmingham, but it's just to clarify that there's not much more to add really to what Linda has said. I think she's summarised the issues there. Just to being in a 114 is that all contracts continue to be honoured. All spend that comes in for a ring-fenced purpose that can only be spent on that purpose continues to be spent on that purpose. I think between those two things, we've covered a bulk of our relationship financially with the CA. So those are the two important things to highlight. But Linda's given a pretty much up-to-date assessment of where we're at. There's not much more I can add at this stage from a BCC perspective.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? If not, thank you, Peter. You know, again, from such a big and complicated area, you managed to always highlight to us the things that are we need to just focus on, and thank you for that.
I think Lisa want to say something.
She hasn't got a hand up. Lisa, was there something you wanted to say? Sorry, you haven't got your hand up, but Vice Chair thought you might. No?
Me?
No? Yeah.
No, sorry, thank you.
Right, internal audit. Says Julia is going to give us a verbal update on the resourcing point, and then Lorraine will talk us through the report. Because I think we should immediately flag Peter Farrow is no longer leading on the internal audit side, and we should probably record our thanks to Peter for all of his efforts on our behalf.
Just there was none of us here at the last meeting to be able to record that. I think it is appropriate that we do record thanks.
And Peter in particular for obviously presenting and representing the service for apparently 5 years. So we should just flag that. So sorry, who's picking? Is Julia with us?
She's on the screen.
I am, Chair.
Oh, hi, Julia. Thank you. Sorry.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Just to give you a very brief update as to where we are with the internal audit, the team at the moment that we are bringing in-house. We are all systems go. We've got all the jobs out to advertise at the moment. Most of them are closing towards the end of this week or the beginning of next week. So the structure will look like, or we hope it will look like, a head of internal audit and information governance, a senior internal audit officer, 2 internal audit officers. Underneath that as well, we will have Gurmit, who's already our information governance manager, and we're bringing in 2 additional information governance roles, one which will be a security and GDPR officer, and one which will be an information governance assistant. So we're really trying to strengthen both the audit and the information governance roles within the combined authority. So to say, most of those, the head of the senior auditors, the information governance roles all close on the Sunday, and the internal auditor roles close on Monday. So hopefully very soon we'll be able to get recruiting and get some people into post for that. So I think it's looking good at the moment, I think, Chair.
Good. I think for the next meeting, yeah, it'd be great to have an org chart which just sets out what roles we have, who's filled them. I think Councillor Kate, I didn't know whether you wanted to say anything about, but obviously, just so members are aware, we are moving to a position whereby it is an in-house internal audit resource, having had it previously subcontracted to Wolverhampton. But I don't know if was there anything further you wanted to.
No, that was essentially it. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, very good. Thanks, thanks, Judith. Lorraine, do you want to pick up on that?
Sure. So I think it is worth just noting at the moment, whilst we're waiting or doing that recruitment of the new audit team, we are working with yourself, providing general oversight. And on the screen, I've got 2 audit colleagues that are joining us. There's Annie in the middle at the bottom and Jeremy at the top right. And they're supporting us with the audit activity so that we do have a full complement of qualified auditors undertaking all the audits.
And this is Bammy leading on the transport.
Yes, he is doing the transport review for us. So Jeremy has only joined us this week, so he's yet to experience any audits directly within the authority. Obviously, the report is in the pack and hopefully everybody's read that to get the full detail. We have completed 3 audits this period, 2 of which were outstanding from the 22-23 audit plan. And it is worth noting that as a result of those being completed, we have referred back to the head of audit at Wolverhampton to confirm the annual audit opinion of the auditor. And they have now confirmed that what was made as a provisional opinion at the last meeting of reasonable assurance has now been confirmed and will be incorporated into the annual governance statement. Of the 3 audits we've completed, there was a review of the annual education budget, but specifically the provider performance management arrangements, the external funding arrangements and gifts and hospitality. The first 2 were awarded a satisfactory audit rating and the gifts and hospitality are limited. You'll be able to see all the detail of those in relation in the reports. Just to note, I wasn't at the meeting last time, but I'm conscious, Councillor Kay, you made reference to your concerns about the use of the word satisfactory. We have had separate email communications continuing that discussion. And just for committee to note that we have acknowledged that comment, but we're mindful because we're going through this evolution of a new audit team being developed, rather than make change short term and then it potentially changing again once the new team is in place. We will be looking overall at the whole policies and procedures of internal audit once that team's in place, and that will be considered and captured at that time.
Yeah, the CIPFA have actually not issued guidance on this, but they did do a survey to see what was the most prevalent assessments, and I would suggest that we follow the popular vote on that.
Very good. I think it's right that the new head of internal audit has the ultimate. And I looked at the guidance as well, and it is ultimately down to a discussion between us and the internal audit function to agree on what classifications. As you say, there's a whole range. I did look, and there's a wide range of different types of. And I even looked at what Solihull and Birmingham do. Birmingham do red, amber, and green, and Solihull have 5 classifications. So there is a variety. I think it'd be good to have an agreed position, and we should do that with the new head of internal audit. And I'm absolutely in favour of reflecting on the guidance that comes from CIPFA. So thank you for raising the point. We'll
Sorry, I should just comment. Claire Hatton has just joined us. She's the interim director of employment skills and communities, and really has just come to join us so that she can assist with any questions that might be raised in relation to the adult education.
Good.
This is Miguel Silva, who is the Senior Delivery Manager for the Adult Education Budget as well.
Okay, very good.
Any questions? Thank you.
Right, very good. I suppose, obviously, my first slight concern is, we've we've only completed one audit for the 23-24 year, and we're halfway through the year. So there is clearly a lot to do in the second 6 months. I just put that out as a concern about the ability to actually deliver the programme, but I'm sure you've got that in hand.
Yeah, unfortunately, even whilst we are going through this evolution and we are bringing contractors in, we had one auditor that became seriously ill, was out of, unfortunately, she's no longer with us, but we lost that resource for 4 months. We had another auditor join us who only stayed for a couple of months, and he's now departed. So it's quite difficult to retain a team. So we're quite eager to get that permanent team in place as quickly as we can.
As are we. And internal audit is such a fundamental part of the assurance we get as a committee. So, and we've set a programme, and it's really important that that programme gets delivered as much as possible. So, okay. In terms of the specific reports, on the adult education report, I suppose my question was that there didn't seem to be a wholehearted agreement between the auditors and the team vis-a-vis the recommendations, i.e. the first one wasn't agreed and the third and fourth were only partially agreed. And that's quite unusual, really. One would normally expect the auditors and the team to get to a position where they agree on the points. Is there anything I should be?
Bami is the auditor who undertook that one, so probably he's best to answer that question if that's okay.
Yes, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. As it happens, I think there was quite a lot of work done on this review. And at the time of the draft report, the management team felt that some of the information which they had to support the issues I raised was not available to me at the time of the audit. So during discussions, they sent me some further information. And as a result of that, I took another look at the findings, and I agreed with them partially that some of the information they provided addressed some of the issues I raised. As a consequence of that, I then amended the recommendations and took some of them out. And although they partially agreed with some of the issues, at the very least, the recommendations which they're implementing address my concerns anyway. So, just to make sure that we conclude this process in a very positive way, we came to a compromise which accepted their partial agreement.
Okay.
If I may, Chair, I suppose our reflection would be that it was a really good and robust process with BAMI, and big thanks to BAMI for how we conducted the audit. I would say, given some of the context Lorraine's already done, this is probably the first time we've started to get a degree of consistency. The adult education budget is a massive programme. It is £132 million, and we've not yet, until the recent couple of audits with BAMI, had any consistency in it. And we spend most of our time having to explain the programme and getting the understanding with the auditor. So I think, now we can start to build that relationship. We'll have a really productive set of internal audits that can really look at the key issues. But I would say that there's been a gap in understanding of the programme and what's delivered as well, which has led to maybe not the evidence being presented in the right way or the understanding to start with. But it's definitely improving as a process, and I'm really pleased with where we got to in the end with this.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I'm encouraged to hear that. I'd say it is obviously preferable that we get to agreed positions, but I understand the context why the report is as it is. And one should acknowledge there's only one amber, 3 green. So, but it was just slightly unusual to see positions not agreed between the parties. That's Sparty.
Perhaps you're not the right people to answer the question, but is it still quite difficult to get training providers? We had quite a serious issue in the last 12 months, if I remember rightly, with one of them. My guess is that, I don't want to use the expression scraping the barrel, but we're using training providers which perhaps, or some of whom, are not really quite what we would want. Is that a fair comment? I mean, you can only recruit people who come forward. I appreciate that.
Partially fair, I guess I would say that the market is not as amazing as we might like it to be. So there are some really good and high quality providers out there. So I think it is fair to say we've probably in the past had some that maybe not been as great as we would like. I would say though that we've gone through quite a process of reforming how we do our our sourcing of providers, moving to a dynamic purchasing system, moving to a better controls framework, moving to better specifications as well in terms of the way we buy as well as the way we manage. And you know, I am confident we have a better set of providers now. I'd still say the market is limited in terms of what we have to choose from, but I do think we are far more robust in our purchasing and our management and development of those providers. So.
Thank you. Okay. I didn't have any further observations on the adult education report. It is a really important area. As you're probably aware, I've been pushing quite hard to make sure we continue to look at it. You know, it's 140 million of spend, and it is a sector that has its challenges on occasion. So, you know, we welcome the report, we welcome the recommendations, and I particularly welcome the positive way in which the relationship's developing between the internal audit team and your team. So, thank you. Okay. On the report on external funding, I thought it was a good report at one level. I thought it highlighted some really important points, and there's a couple of very specific recommendations which I think are really good. But there was also a slight sense that this was the processes themselves were very much work in progress and evolving and developing, and therefore the report was sort of flagging things that, to some extent, the team already knew and were working on. So I suppose my only real observation was the timing of this. I suppose it's useful because it means that it gives a momentum to improve and take on board some of the recommendations. But I thought it's good report actually, and again it's good to see that the processes themselves are evolving to bring greater consistency. I had one very specific question, which is possibly directed at Jyoti rather than, which is where SAF comes into this process, which is it's after we've made the applications, which I don't know, I was just slightly surprised.
And I think you're right. I think probably Jyoti is the best one to.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to pick it up now, Jyoti, or whether later, but do you feel SAF's input to this process is at the right point, or is it?
I suppose it's two, Linda might want to jump in as well. I suppose it's two discrete processes. One is about seeking the approval to actually make the application from a financial assurance perspective. And the second is at the point when the combined authority receive the funding is when we're initiating the single assurance framework and initiating the programme. So they are complementary processes, but distinct processes. And with the single settlement and the recommendations which are captured in the report, the assurance team will continue to work with the finance team and also governance and legal to see if we can identify quick wins in that earlier external funding application process.
So yeah, if I could just come in on that as well. So a lot of the we developed this schedule originally so that we could get sort of an advanced planning site from an organisational capacity perspective of what was coming downstream. So this was about having a schedule that showed us from a resourcing and a capacity and a capability and a financial perspective what we'd got coming downstream, and actually whether or not we got opportunities across the WMCA for either interconnectivity, interface, whether there was duplication. You might have had someone in transport doing the same thing as somebody in housing, etc. So it was brought about to bring those benefits. And what we have to do, obviously, is before we can put expressions of interest in for bids that they don't have by any stretch of the imagination, a full business case needed for them. That the business case in a funding bid will always come later. But what I do need to make sure as the Authority 151 is that actually before we put those bids in, that the authority has that the bids actually are aligned to our strategic objectives, that we're not acting outside of something that we would normally do, and that from an authority it doesn't place us at any undue risks, whether that's reputational or financial, and that the authority has enough resources and capacity and money to actually, if the bid is to be successful, to deliver the bid. So I think there's a lighter touch piece up front as to why this funding register was developed. When we get the money, then the SAF process kicks in.
Understand. And the point around single settlement is very relevant to that. My only other comment on the internal audit is the gifts and hospitality, that, you know, there's some pretty clear but relatively straightforward recommendations there which clearly need to be worked on. You know, this is not a material issue, but it's clearly an issue we have to get right as an organisation. So I get a sense that somebody else may have encouraged this review, and if that's the case, then I welcome it as well, and we should just, you know, get this knocked into shape, to use a colloquial term.
And you know, from the discussions, obviously, with Helen as MO and Julia as the head of governance, have been very supportive of the outcome.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I accept that from the acceptance of the recommendations, but yeah, very good. Any other questions from other members of the committee on the reports themselves? No, if not, thank you very much. Thank you, and we look forward to a flurry of reports coming to future meetings in due course. And thank you, Barry, and welcome. Thank you very much. Right, key financial systems accounts payable update. Louisa, I think this shouldn't take very long because it looks like pretty much everything's done.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, members requested an update on the accounts payable key financial systems audit findings from last year. So it was the autumn of last year, and of the 5 components of the key financial systems, so they're treasury management, budgetary control, accounts payable, the one question, accounts receivable, and general ledger. 4 of those components received a substantial rating, but accounts payable received satisfactory rating. So we put some extra effort into trying to resolve the issues that arose during the course.
Can I just flag as well, for the new members of the committee, it was the second year in a row where it had been, accounts payable had been satisfactory. So that was why we really did want to see progress against the recommendation.
Yeah, so some extra attention as being a project team's been convened to look at the purchase to pay process. So accounts payable is right at the end of the purchase to pay process. I think the issues that we need to address are much further upstream and involve the wider organisation rather than just the accounts payable team, if that makes sense. So a purchase order is raised prior to goods or services being purchased, and making the payment of the invoice is the very last step process. So that team has been working together, joining together the finance team with the procurement team to work out ways in which we can raise awareness of the no payment policy right across the combined authority and improve the purchase to pay process in general to remove blockages and speed up the process. So most of the actions from that project team will be completed by the end of December. But I think it's going to be a continuous journey. You can't kind of switch off after you've implemented all of those actions. We need to keep on it. We need to make sure that there is proper understanding right across the combined authority of the purchase to pay process, that we're training staff that are responsible for raising purchase orders and approving purchase orders. So that's all I want to say really.
Well, I'd say I'm encouraged by the progress, and we hope that obviously from this year's review that we'll be upgrading from satisfactory. Councillor.
Yeah, I think this is a good sort of satisfactory situation. On the question just came to mind when you mentioned the how we manage the procurement, because some of the payments will be halfway through. We have to have some understanding where the procurement is going through and who is assessing those procurement outcomes when we pay.
So as part of the purchase to pay project team, we're looking at each individual purchase order rather than a strategic procurement exercise.
Okay, yeah, all right.
So we've kind of done it at that granular level because that's how the transactions get into the finances. That makes sense. So we've not looked at strategic procurement activity, but we are speaking with the procurement team to make sure that both teams are kind of going in the same direction, if that makes sense.
Yes. I'm trying to understand how the procurement is being assessed from audit point of view.
So that would be a separate audit.
That will be picked up later through the internal audit. Okay, Councillor Martin.
You mentioned training on this policy. Have all the staff now received the training?
Well, at the moment, we're developing a training programme to make sure that we're targeting the right staff in the combined authority. So we haven't actually delivered any of the new training, but we've got a regular training programme from the business world finance system, where individuals in smallish groups are trained how to raise requisitions, for example, or how to approve requisitions, and it's at that point that they become purchase order. So what we've got a training programme that's happening at the moment, but I think we need to target it a bit better to deliver the improvements that are set out in the report, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Bartley was one who'd flagged that this was 2 years in a row that we'd had this position, so hopefully you're pleased to see the progress we're making. Very good. Thank you. Housing investigation. Nigel, join us. Thank you. Although I'm not sure you needed to, based on, but thank you anyway for coming along, just in case there are any questions. So this again, for those who are new to the committee, this was an investigation that was undertaken last year. A number of recommendations were made, and we were keen to see that those recommendations were being taken on board. But obviously what your report highlights to us is that whilst the recommendations have been taken on board, the actual application of them hasn't actually come through yet because you haven't had any projects that have come for consideration. Is that fair?
That's absolutely correct, but we will make sure any future ones will be really explicit on any decisions that are made, that we confirm existing use value for the site and the proposed use. There's no difference between, it's really clear about any decision being made.
Okay, Councillor Bosworth.
Chair, really the same point that you're making. Could we have another report fairly quickly so that we can see how it's operating in practice? Because this is a difficult area and it's a significant shift in the way in which land transactions have been handled, I think. And it's also one that's familiar, I think, to a greater or lesser extent in every local authority, where affordable housing is a key issue. I take my hat off to WMCA for having such a large percentage of affordable housing. Other authorities struggle to get anywhere near that. So another report, rather than waiting 12 months, would be great.
Well, we'll take your steer to some extent. Obviously, I don't want to say to you, come back in December and then you just report the same thing. So, but
I think we just take it back that any acquisition or disposal that it reflects these, we bring back at that time what we're doing, just so you can see exactly the process that's been carried out. More than happy to do that.
Okay.
It will be embedded as part of the property strategy moving forward and acquisition strategy. So we will have it documented and reinforced in as many ways as we can.
Okay, very good. Okay, so maybe we'll just pick up in due course and get another update from you at an appropriate point. But thank you very much. Been slightly Nicola, I don't know who wrote the front page of this report, but they seem to have lost the ability to spell check because half the words are all over the place on page 105. So somebody could. I couldn't even work out what some of the words were meant to be. Anyway, there you go. Just to prove I do read every word. Very good. Thank you very much.
Just can I ask, maybe Helen can help me on this. Because looking at the original sort of objectives of the combined authority, I might have raised before, I can't remember. The housing part wasn't part of the combined authority. I'm not sure whether somebody else can help on this. It was certainly sprung up in this part. I'm still trying to understand where combined authority got, because the housing, homelessness, and all these things are part of the local, the other local bodies, rather, councils, and not necessarily. I'm struggling with this, always have. Why combined authority jumping into it? I'm just trying to understand. It's just something different. I never understood it.
I don't think it's a question for you.
No, it's more for Helen. That's why
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know whether Helen, because obviously Helen's only recently. This has existed for as long as I've been involved.
I raised that before you. Yeah.
Linda, is there anything you could add to that?
I think the supply of housing units and WMCA as a regional convener and accountable body for housing funds was in the original Devo deal back in 2016. There was certainly a 200 million land fund as part of that original deal. So it is a role as a regional convener, and to there is a role for the combined authority at a regional scale to step in where there is a viability gap in the market. So whilst the local authorities have statutory responsibility for social housing, we're not stepping into the social housing space at all. We are looking at housing supply across the region with the accountable body for regional funds for housing, and we look to convene and also to influence then affordable housing supply. And when we have our own definition, you'll be aware of affordable housing. That isn't, I'm not talking about social housing. We're not in the local authority space in that regard, but it's certainly part of the original 2016 Devo deal that's part of the remit of combined authorities.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Just, was that something to do with reclaimed sites, brownfield sites that were contaminated, and help developers develop those?
Yeah, so a lot of viability gaps are around actually the contaminated land, aren't they? So we've certainly got a lot of grants that come in where if there is a proven viability gap, developers can approach us for a grant to remediate the land, which then ensures that the land then is ready for them to commercially develop housing on.
I see quite a bit of evidence of that at the investment board meeting,
especially in the Black Country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Jyoti, I think it's back to you now formally for the presentation of your normal inverted commas quarter report, and also just to flag to us the refresh on the framework.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So as the Chair stated, this is just the standing assurance item, which covers the quarterly reporting of the investment projects assurance reviews which have been undertaken, and in this instance it's between April and June of this year. I will take it that the report has been read. To summarise the detail and the performance information that's captured in the report, there is a summary in section 4 that concludes the key observations from that reporting period. Probably two key points as an extract from that section. One is that there has been an increase in the number of project reviews. So again, that should be providing the West Midlands Combined Authority and ARAC with that assurance in terms of the single assurance framework as being embedded in the organisation. And we have seen a reduction in the number of red recommendations as well. A key point referring to point B in that section is that so although the single assurance framework is very much part of the control framework and keeping the organisation safe, the tangible benefits which have been seen, I think, in this period is that we're seeing examples now of where some delivery directorates are able to produce business cases more speedily when funding opportunities arise from government addressing changes or new initiatives being driven by the government. So again, we're able to respond quicker, and that's been highlighted in a couple of the delivery directorates, which are mentioned in the report as well. And just referring to the last section, the review that you had on housing, there continues to be, in context with the other delivery directorates, fewer business cases from the housing directorate, which are summarised in the report. But just to provide assurance, we have met with the new interim director leading the Housing, Property and Regeneration Directorate. And there are external factors which have been mentioned as well. So the projects and the directorate are putting projects through the single assurance framework at the point that business cases are ready to be prepared, but there are a number of external factors driven by the economy and the appetite from developers which have impacted the speed of which business cases have come through. Happy to take any questions.
Only had one, and you've just answered it, which was the point around the housing directorate. Yeah, I think I'm right in saying they were the last directorate to come to the party, as it were, in terms of adopting this, and then almost immediately they've seemed to have slowed down in terms of business cases coming through. So I'm encouraged to hear that hopefully that will pick up. Did you just say that we've got a new interim housing director? Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
When you say so John Godfrey, his name's on the report, so he's not. I suppose he's not new because he's the interim housing director who is holding the role that was Gareth Bradford.
Yes.
But
so I suppose, yeah. So my question was, is what there is a process in place to appoint a permanent?
Yes, absolutely. That recruitment is underway at the minute. It's been out for a couple of months now in terms of recruitment to the new exec director.
Okay. I didn't have any other questions. Thank you. You know, I'd say it seemed to represent a continuation of the good progress we've been making through the calendar year. And a wider adoption of the processes that are in place, and some improvement in the number of red recommendations. So all those seem to be positive developments to me. So I didn't have anything further on this report. Any questions from other members of the committee?
Just observation, perhaps it's not for this committee, but it's the zero emission one. Government is changing the goalposts, is going to affect us. Yeah, I know, but just the
the net zero recent announcements.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying that the mayor has, however, come out and reconfirmed the commitment of the combined authority to all the existing commitments that the CA have made? Is that fair?
So I think obviously there are a number of announcements happening this week from the Conservative Party conference that both the mayor, I think, has cancelled a trip to Munich today in order that he can stay and respond on behalf of the West Midlands later today, based on all of the announcements. And we, as a combined authority, are obviously going to need to look at what are the risks and implications of any any announcements that have been made, including the announcement around drivers and the net zero targets, and also anything that may or may not get announced on HS2, etc. So it's one that we need to deal with once we understand all of the statements that have been made.
Yes, I think we'll probably leave it at that at this particular point in the cycle. Okay. Any other questions for Jyoti on the quarterly report? I think we're getting into a good rhythm with these now, Jyoti, so thank you. Whether there's a, I don't have the, always in the spirit of a continuous improvement, if there's anything else we should be looking at, but no, from my perspective, it's very helpful to see. And as I say, in the same way that internal audit and the risk analysis are key parts of the overall framework, obviously your work is critically important as well as obviously the work from external audit. Right, in terms of the refresh of the actual document itself, you've helpfully summarised, I think, in section 2, the relatively minor, I think you describe as minor changes. Anything further you want to flag for us?
No, this is a mandatory requirement that's mandated by GLUC that we need to update the assurance framework on an annual basis. There was a deep dive substantial review last year, and therefore this time round it has been relatively minor, and the changes are highlighted in the report. It's a mandatory requirement that it goes through our governance framework and is approved by the board. So the request today is for the updated assurance framework to be endorsed by the committee.
Okay. Very good. I am mindful that obviously for some members of the committee it's new because they weren't on the committee last year when we considered this in detail. So, but yeah, welcome any questions. Comment. That's okay.
Yeah, I know we've already touched on the internal audit improvements, but I would prefer to see that role more defined within this document, which I think is relevant to it.
Okay. Yeah, did you hear the?
I did. So I can note the observations. What we've tried to do is work with our governance colleagues to make sure that any updates which are included in the assurance framework are aligned to and consistent with wording in the constitution, so that they are aligned. But I can certainly take that away and work with Julia to ensure that the information is consistent. What is included in the single assurance framework, which differs from internal audit, is that this specifically is in relation to the programme assurance reviews for investment programmes, and the internal audit processes will be captured in more detail within the constitution in relation to the audit activity that occurs in our operational work. Would you concur, Julia?
Yes, and just to kind of look at what Jyoti was saying, we're working very closely together now to make sure that all of our processes do align, and then much kind of streamlined and succinct and less duplication. So we're meeting on a very regular basis now, governance and Jyoti's team as well.
I suppose there's the extent to which that should then just be acknowledged in this document, I think would probably be helpful. Very good. Okay, any other questions on this framework document? It's as you say, one, it's a requirement. Two, it's we need to be comfortable to recommend that the board adopt this, obviously having been approved by the SLT. So can I take it that people are comfortable for us to do so? Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jyoti. Right, arm's length companies. This one, this has been an area that we've. Thank you. So first of all, we've been asking a little bit about this for a while now. So thank you for pulling this analysis together. Are you going to take us through this?
Very briefly, Chair.
Yeah.
Time. Obviously, this came out of a request about April in the draft annual governance statement. I think the concerns arose from Grant Thornton's report last year around part that wholly owned companies might have played in some governance failures in some councils. So we agreed to bring literally just a summary of the companies that we have an involvement in. It has taken me some time to get to the bottom of it since I joined in January, and that's purely because I've been asking lots of questions about what they are and what they do and why we have them and so on. I'm conscious that Linda and Louise and colleagues will be all over that, but it's obviously new to me from a legal and governance point of view. I just want to understand that. So you've got a summary in there of what the companies are, very briefly what they do, who the directors are. We are doing some ongoing work about what the most appropriate kind of overall governance, keeping an eye on them, is in terms of, do we have shareholding agreements? Do we have regular meetings? Will depend on the size of the company and what they do and turnover and so on. And obviously, Linda and Louise are very heavily involved in that as well. I think in terms of ARAC, my proposal would be that we simply bring at the end of each municipal year a short report that says whether we've had any more, whether we've closed any down, whether there've been any issues, so that you are just aware. I don't think there are any particular problems to flag to you at this stage, but if that should be the case, then obviously we would flag them in year. But otherwise, I think once a year, a quick summary that says, this is what we've got now.
Yeah.
Any questions? I'll leave it at that and just throw it open for questions.
That's fast.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really good that we've got Grant here, because I want to refer, if I may, to that bit of this report that refers to the Grant Thornton report from a year ago. And one of the things that somewhat jumped off the page to me from the kind of list of issues that's in paragraph 2.3, but also from my own life in both the public sector and the private sector, is lack of commercial experience. I mean, in a way, that's highlighted with the item that says lack of skills around commercial decision making. I appreciate that with public authority owned companies, there's got to be a balance, but it does seem to me that balance is in many instances tipped so heavily towards, you know, the maintenance of public authority ownership, that the difficulties over directors not having any or very, very little commercial experience, that seems to be a fundamental issue. And I'm just wondering how the WMCA sees it, if perhaps they don't see it as an issue. If they do see it as an issue, is that being addressed in any sense?
Sure, I might respond to that. I
Yeah.
expect Linda might want to come in as well. I think the combined authority is a little bit different from most local authorities in that we do specifically recruit people who very much have that commercial experience. So I think most of my career has been in local authorities, and they tend to be people who've mainly worked in local authorities doing the same thing that they've always done. But here, my experience is we have recruited some very astute commercial people whose background is not in the local authority. So I think, I'm sure Linda and Louise will endorse that, but we have perhaps a better understanding around commercial decision making within our teams than we might see in other authorities. Linda's got a hand up, I'm sure she wants to add to that.
I just concur with Helen's point. I think as we've come from a transport authority that's not necessarily has not been a local authority. I for one am a commercially qualified accountant. I'm not a public sector accountant in that way. I've transitioned to be a public sector accountant and qualified into SITFA, having qualified originally as a commercial accountant. So we do tend to recruit people from a broad spectrum. So a lot of our investment director, etc., you know, has got considerable banking and finance experience. So I don't think we're in that as an extreme a position as potentially the report is alluding to. We do have, and all our directors have statutory training to ensure that everybody who is on those companies has proper director training to ensure that everybody understands their role and their responsibilities and their need to act as a commercial in the interests of that company while they are on as a director of that company. So I do think we're quite tight and robust in that sort of way. We are looking at the minute for a couple of them just to sort of potentially widen the board membership, certainly from a Midland Metro perspective. Actually getting an additional director on there who is more independent. I think there's more about the independence rather than the ability to act commercially. I'm not particularly concerned that we can't act commercially, and I think all those companies do act commercially. But actually having that independence is where we're trying to sort of expand some of the number of directors on some of the companies.
I don't know whether you'll take any comfort from this at all, but I was a director of the West Midlands Growth Company for about 8 or 9 years, so I can vouch for the fact that there's quite a lot of commercial input into that particular company. To be fair, I also recognise quite a number of the names of some of the other directors. So, you know, on WM5G, I know a couple of the directors. West Midlands Development Capital, I know John Hanley and Sue Summers as well. You know, so I think your point is well made, but I think Helen's comments are also actually quite valid in terms of these companies. But you know, I think you have our support in terms of continuing to make sure that there's appropriate commercial representation on these on these organisations. One tiny point from I couldn't. This is really helpful. Thank you very much. One thing I couldn't get was a sense of the size of these organisations. You know, how big are they? How many people do they employ? What is their turnover? Just when you do your year-end summary, and I think it'd be really helpful just to actually see. You know, obviously I noticed 2 of them are dormant, but you know, the amount of money going through West Midlands Development Capital Limited, for example, would be interesting to know. Midland Metro, I think we know a little bit about. The other one that sort of caught my eye was West Midlands Rail Limited. I've just got no sense of the size of the.
We can put more detail in.
So a bit of turnover or net assets employed.
Summary was a summary.
Yeah, and the shareholdings you can see in the accounts. I think most of them are 100%, but not all of them. So that's super. And possibly the audit arrangements.
I was just going to raise that.
Yeah.
Because I know the all companies have their own auditors somewhere.
Pretty much.
Yeah. But we don't know what's going on. There should be some unified audit with us coming back to us. Somewhere.
I would say that given that they're separate legal entities, they have their own audit arrangements. I think your role is potentially, if you think there might be a problem somewhere in either one or as a group, wholly owned companies, then that might be an issue for you. But generally,
so that is truly
is that a fresh hand that Linda's got?
Well, we should know that it's being done, and if we had any concerns, we would have an ability to raise a question. But I was the chair of the audit committee for the West Midlands Growth Company, so I do know they have an audit function, and I know the external auditors. Obviously, we know there is an audit function for Midland Metro Limited, and they have their own auditors as well. But
We do. So if we just come on to that, Grant might want to just so part of the assurance here for this committee is that liaison. So part of the external audit, Grant and the team will make sure that they have visibility of the subsidiaries, and if there was any issues, if we hadn't have even brought them through, actually they would be raised as part of our external audit report from Grant if Grant had any concerns at all.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, I suppose in a way there's 2 different or parallel debates going on here. I mean, in terms of the external audit role, particularly for the group audit, we only identify 2 companies as being material.
That's right. Yeah.
To the financial statements, and that is MML and WM5G. And even with the growth of the authority, they are actually becoming smaller bodies. So on those 2, we do write directly to the component auditors. They both have auditors. We write to the component auditors. We set out what are called group instructions, where we ask them to undertake specific work at those or give us assurances of the work they do at those organisations in relation to those financial statements around normally about the income expenditure, not particularly big asset owning. So we do undertake specific procedures around that, and we report back on those. On the other companies, they are not necessarily material to the accounts, and therefore we tend to do an analytical review Most of them have audited financial statements. So there's that side of it. I think what you're looking at here, and I think coming out of our report, was the oversight of those companies, and are you aware of potential risks that they are taking that might then, I suppose, in a way, flood back into the authority if the companies fail. And that's where you've seen the big ones. I mean, I think Croydon is a big one where the housing company failed and its liabilities and debt come back into the host authority. So in a way, that's the risk you are looking to manage.
Yeah.
Now, I think you are different though into types of companies that you actually, so you can't really read that directly. A lot of these are maybe new ventures where people are going to housing companies, etc., where they don't have a lot of experience of running it. Whereas I think that's the risk you're doing. And I think one of the things we were saying is you don't want to be, you are not the audit committee of those companies. They are standalone. So it's getting your role, getting the assurance you need that those companies are, I suppose, trading, you know, if they're not for profit or they are properly trading. We do look at going concern for two. We look at, you've got those assurances. So it's really mitigating that risk. And are you happy that they are being run appropriately or being governed properly? And then the risk of the authority. So that's the sort of where this paper is coming in. I think, how are you getting the assurance that they are actually operating?
And I really welcome the paper, and thank you. But I say that's in summary, just giving us a little bit more of the context.
Yes, on that point, that in our role as, or the authority's role as shareholder, it has an interest in having a joined up external audit policy. And the other issue which we've had in Solihull in similar circumstances as to whether these subsidiaries are actually within the domain of our internal audit team. So that we can ask questions sort of using that route.
Okay, good. Again, that's probably something to pick up in that event. Sorry, that would be great. Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thanks. So I did a similar piece of work at BCC looking at our group companies for exactly the reasons that Grant Thornton did its overarching review. So one of the questions I had was around, we've got quite a small number of CA officers who appear as directors on a number of these companies, which isn't a comment on capability, it's just a question about the capacity of a small number of individuals to do that, whether we have assessed that risk appropriately. When it comes to governance on these, we tussled with this back at Birmingham. We have a separate committee which looks at group company governance. I'm not suggesting we go down that route because it's a much smaller portfolio here. But an annual update to me worries me as not being regular enough to keep appraised of any risks that do arise, given what can fall back on a council when things go wrong. So I'd be more comfortable at least half yearly, maybe quarterly updates, even if it's simply a nil return, nothing to report in terms of material change to those companies, just keeping that temperature check on what is happening, given some of the shocks we've had the last few years, certainly at our end, that have sent companies different directions. And be concerned about us not having sight of those here.
Fair comment. I think an observation as to whether or not anything has changed would clearly be, or confirmation that nothing has changed.
Yeah, we can do that. I think I've certainly had shareholder committees in previous authorities where you have got a lot of companies that are more or less trading very independently, very arm's length. I think my experience here is we are on top of what these companies are doing on a kind of weekly, monthly basis. Because as you rightly say, most of the people who are directors are our employees, so they're not as distant from us as you might find it out elsewhere. But I mean, we can certainly do that, but I am very comfortable that as a team we are on top of what they're doing, and if there were something going wrong, we would certainly bring it to you. It will be year end. But yeah, we can do that.
And this might sound like a dumb question, are we confident this is the full list of companies that we have an interest in?
Yes. We've done a lot of work, which is why it's taken us so long. I've searched, we've asked all the officers who appear, we've done searches against their name on Companies House to make sure they're not on anything else that we didn't know about, which brought up all sorts of issues about people being on companies in their personal capacity, so we were able to rule those out. We've done searches against WMCA and TFWM being interested parties. We've done searches against the address. I think unless somebody's been very, very clever about hiding something accidentally, I'm confident as I can be that we found more.
Do we have any procedures in place for if a part of the organisation wishes to set up a new company for any purpose?
Linda, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we need a board decision to set up a new company.
We do, we absolutely. So we have to, any setup of a new company requires a board decision to do that.
Sounds like some questions born out of experience. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that. Very good. No, thank you for that. And let's have a look forward to the further updates in due course. It just brings me on to forward plan. Obviously, we, as always, we will reflect on this following today's meeting, but obviously we've got our next 3 meetings set out in the diary. Hopefully you've all got those. Next meeting obviously will now include the update on the annual accounts for 22-23, which is set out there, as well as the half-year treasury report. So, there's no further questions. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you again for a quorum meeting and your input to it. And obviously, look forward to catching up again on the 4th of December. And 2 minutes over this time, so it's gone a lot better than last time. So
It's not bad given that you started 7 minutes late.
thank you.